Mr. Iqbal's body will be cut into 100 parts and put in acid as he himself has done with many children. If I told you that this was the sentence of a real judge in a trial that really took place, would you believe me? Probably not, but in fact this is what happened on March 16, 2000. I started from the statements of the Allah Bakhsh to give you a preview of the monster I am about to tell you about. I assure you that his atrocities were such as to make him one of the worst human beings in the world. Javed Iqbal was born in 1956 in Lahore, East Pakistan. He was the sixth son of a merchant, and from an early age he had to work hard and bring home some money. Working for him was certainly not a problem, and in fact he rather worked hard, even during his studies. Around 1978, he moved to Shadbagh, where his father bought him 2 houses. His goal was to work on his own by founding a steel remelting company. Until 1995, little is known about his life, except that he lived with teenage boys who helped him recover materials for his business. In 1995, some of the boys who worked occasionally for him reported him for sexual assault, but no action was taken against him and the case was dismissed. 3 years later, in June 1998, a second accusation came against him, this time of sodomy towards minors. Also in that case, the soft line was adopted and Iqbal was released on bail. Probably the judge's choice was due to the fact that during his arrest, the agents went very hard and beat him, causing some injuries on his spine that paralyzed him for a few months. The exact date on which he began killing is not known because a reference is made to the diary found in his house, in which Iqbal meticulously noted his murders. That diary concerned only the year 1999, and for this reason the whole trial was based on that evidence, also because it was more than sufficient for his conviction. In any case, 74 names of children between the ages of 6 and 16 who disappeared in the area and were never found. It is believed that he killed more than 130 of them, were noted in that diary. Iqbal chose his victims among the orphans and street children whom he approached with promises of food and work. Having gained their trust, he convinced them to follow him into the house where he drugged, tortured, and raped them. Finally, he strangled them, dismembered them, and dissolved them in a tub filled with hydrochloric acid. The murders took place in the presence and with the help of 3 accomplices, teenage boys who shared the house with Iqbal. In 1999, when the disappearances became dozens, a manhunt began that even involved the army. Iqbal got rid of the liquefied remains by dumping them into the sewers, this until June of that year, when the neighbors complained about the bad smell. At that point, he and his accomplices decided to throw them into the Ravi River. For each murder, Iqbal took photos of the victims and recorded the names, ages, and dates of death in a diary. Probably the man began to feel hunted by the authorities and the army, who asked questions about missing children. There was also a discussion with the neighbors about some drums he had in the garden, into which he poured the hydrochloric acid necessary to dissolve the corpses. The fact is that in December 1999, Iqbal sent a letter to the police and the local newspaper Daily Jang, where he confessed to the murder of 100 boys, that he felt no remorse and hated the world. In his letter, Iqbal wrote that he had killed those children, almost all beggars with no fixed destination, because they had tried to unite in order to abuse him, which of course was not believed at all. Iqbal was 43 years old at the time. That letter of his was shown to the parents of the missing children, unleashing their anger and causing a general uproar. On December 30th, he showed up at the Lahore headquarters of the newspaper, claiming that he was not the real killer, but a mere eyewitness to the killings, and blamed the boys who lived with him. He refused to go to the police because he knew that the investigation would lead to discovering the truth. But more than 100 soldiers arrived to pick him up, who quickly immobilized and arrested him. During the interrogations, he tried to retract his confession, but the police had already searched his house and found everything necessary to accuse him. The remains of 2 bodies were still in a blue tub in his house. His diary was found with pictures of 105 children and 74 names, of which Iqbal had confessed to the killing in his letter. The clothes that belonged to his victims were found, and in the garden there was an acid-filled drum that contained other remains. None of the bodies were identifiable, but the parents of several missing children recognized their children's belongings. If his condition was already compromised in the eyes of society, Javed Iqbal managed to make it even worse. He declared that the motivations for his murders were: take revenge on the police who hurt him when they arrested him. The killing of the children had been an act of charity, a way of light for those small lives now destined forever to the life of the beggar. He wanted to send a message to the parents of the boys, who he thought were responsible for negligence. He had turned himself in because he wanted to give hope to the rest of the beggar children. He could have reached 500 murders and more, but at a certain point he refused to exceed 100. Those statements incited even more the relatives of the victims, who presented themselves in front of the prison where he was being held awaiting trial to claim his body and do justice on their behalf. The authorities and the army struggled to keep the crowd calm, and several times scuffles and attacks on the officers broke out in the street. His accomplices were stopped in the Sahawa area, where they were begging passers-by. A few days after his arrest, Ishaq Billah, the person accused of selling acid to Iqbal and participating in the rapes, committed suicide by jumping out of the third-floor window of a police headquarters. On March 16, 2000, a Pakistani court sentenced serial killer Javed Iqbal to death, and Judge Allah Bakhsh Ranja added that Iqbal's body should be cut into 100 parts and dissolved in acid, as he himself had done with many children. A week after Iqbal's death sentence, the Grand Council of Islamic Ideology declared that the dismemberment and dissolution of the body in acid went against the Islamic teaching of respect for a dead body and overturned that part of the sentence. He was then sentenced to hang, as was his accomplice Sajid Ahmad. Another accomplice, a 13-year-old boy named Muhammad Sabir, was sentenced to 42 years in prison. Nadim Muhammad, the last accomplice, was sentenced to 182 years in prison. He was 15 years old and found guilty of 13 murders. Iqbal tried to commit suicide in his cell twice but was saved in time. However, on October 25, 2001, Iqbal and Sabir were found dead in their cell, hanged with sheets. Their apparent suicides came just 4 days after the country's highest Islamic court granted them an appeal against the death sentence.